Why did the guards suddenly move? It wasn't supposed to happen. The tourists were laughing, snapping photos, their footsteps echoing off the cobblestones as if history itself had grown tired of being watched. The Queen's guards stood in their perfect line, immovable, unshaken, unblinking. But then, with a single step, one soldier broke formation. His boot hit the ground with a force that silenced the chatter. Eyes turned. The man in the bright red tunic and bearskin hat advanced toward one of the tourists. The crowd gasped, cameras lowered, children clutched their parents' hands. And that's when she felt it, the surge of memory, the sting of another day, another uniform, another moment when silence was shattered. She wasn't just a tourist, not really, she never had been. Her name was Captain Elise Marlowe, once a sniper, once a protector, once someone who understood what it meant to stand immovable while chaos pressed in around her. But to the people around her, she was just another visitor in the square, watching a soldier break his vow of stillness. And though the guard's voice was loud, commanding the tourist to step back, Elise heard something else beneath it, a fracture, a hidden signal buried in discipline. Her pulse quickened, because she had seen it before. The sound of boots shifting where they shouldn't, the sudden breach of ritual, the performance broken not by accident but necessity. And as she watched, she knew, this wasn't about a careless tourist getting too close. This was about something else, something deeper. The air itself seemed to thicken. She stepped back, blending with the crowd, yet her mind raced forward, piecing fragments she thought she had left behind on other battlefields. And it struck her like a blow. There was a reason the guard had broken rank, and it wasn't for show. But what? Her throat tightened. No one here knew she had once been tasked with protecting things far more fragile than palaces and tourists. No one knew that she had once carried the weight of secrets that could end lives if spoken aloud. And now, standing among strangers, she felt that weight again. Because the guard's eyes, dark, locked, unshaken, had met hers, just for an instant. And in that instant, Elise realized, this was not coincidence. But what did he want her to remember? She didn't sleep much anymore. The night before, she had wandered through London's streets until her legs ached. The sound of rain against cobblestone had been her only companion. She had told herself this trip was for healing, for stepping away from the weight of who she had been. But the truth was harder. She had come here because she couldn't stand silence. Silence reminded her of that desert ridge, the one where the air was hot enough to sear the lungs. The one where she had waited, rifle steady, watching shadows move below, waiting for a signal, waiting for a command. And the command never came. Not in time. Her shot had saved lives that day, but not all of them, not the one that mattered. So when she heard the guard's boots strike out of line, she flinched as if a bullet had ripped the air, because rituals meant safety. Rituals meant control, and when those rituals broke, so did lives. Now the tourist, the man in the gray jacket, stood frozen. He had thought it a game, creeping too close for a photo, but Elise saw the truth in his wide, pale eyes. He wasn't just surprised, he was terrified. What had he realized? What had the guard seen in him that no one else did? The answer hovered, unspoken, in the soldier's rigid stance. She couldn't stay still. Elise found herself moving, weaving through the crowd, her instincts cutting through the haze of uncertainty. She had promised herself she wouldn't do this anymore, wouldn't analyze every movement, wouldn't read danger where there was none. But it was too late. Her mind was already mapping exits, counting guards, scanning hands, pockets, stances. And then she saw it. The tremor in the tourist's hand. The way his fist clenched and unclenched, not like someone embarrassed, but like someone waiting, waiting for the wrong kind of moment. Her chest tightened. She was supposed to be on leave. She was supposed to be a nobody in a crowd. But what if she was? What if she had been drawn here for a reason? She remembered the words of her last commander, spoken in the hollow quiet of a debriefing room. You'll never stop hearing the silence before it breaks. And he had been right. Because now, standing in the heart of a city at peace, Elise could hear it again, the silence before. The guard's voice rang out once more, sharp and final. Step back. But Elise knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Night came with rain, soft at first, then heavy, smearing the city lights into blurred streaks. Elise sat alone in her rented flat, tea untouched, her reflection broken across the glass. Why had the guard looked at her? It was a question she couldn't silence. That gaze, firm, deliberate, almost a plea, wasn't the look of a soldier chastising a tourist. It was something else, a recognition. But recognition of what? Her hand brushed over the scar on her forearm, a thin white line carved by shrapnel years ago. She had covered it often, ashamed of what it reminded her of. But tonight she left it bare, as if daring the shadows to judge her. She wanted to believe she had left that life behind, that she was just Elise now, just a woman wandering through London, carrying nothing heavier than an umbrella. But her body wouldn't let her believe it. The adrenaline still hadn't faded. The silence still hadn't left. And somewhere in the city, a soldier had broken his vow of stillness and looked straight at her. By morning, the story had spread. Clips of the incident were already flooding the internet. A tourist confronted by a guard, laughter turning to shock, voices in the crowd echoing surprise. But Elise noticed what no one else did. In every clip, the guard's head tilted just slightly before he advanced, not at the tourist, not at the crowd, but at her. Her stomach dropped. What message had he sent her in that fleeting motion? And why her? She scrolled through comments, the noise of 1,000 strangers analyzing, mocking, defending. But the truth wasn't in their words. It was in the silence she had been trained to hear. And it was telling her one thing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The weight of her past pressed harder now. She thought of James, the boyish radio operator with the crooked grin. She had promised him coffee after the mission. Promised they'd laugh about the desert heat, about the way sand found its way into every pocket. But James hadn't made it. And Elise had learned the hardest truth of all. Promises meant nothing when silence fell too soon. That was why she had left. That was why she had walked away. But the guard's eyes had pulled her back in, against her will, against her vow to forget. And though she tried to fight it, Elise knew. She was already part of whatever was coming next. Already chosen. And the silence, it was breaking again. Why hadn't he moved sooner? That was the first thought Elise had when she returned to the square the following day. The palace grounds were just as crowded, tourists with cameras, the shuffle of feet, the faint rustle of flags in the autumn wind. Yet she felt something beneath it all, an unease threaded through the air like a current no one else could sense. The guard who had broken formation yesterday wasn't there. His spot was filled by another, rigid and unflinching. Elise watched the row of soldiers, their stillness unnerving, their silence louder than the chatter around them. She waited for a slip, a twitch, a message. But there was nothing. She could have left. She should have left. But her boots remained planted, her body tense with an instinct she thought she had buried. And then movement. Not from the guards this time, but from the crowd. A man with a leather satchel stood too close to the gate. His posture was too tight, his glance too sharp. Elise's eyes narrowed, memories crashing in. Checkpoints, market streets, the way threats hid among ordinary faces. Her pulse quickened. She tried to look away, but she couldn't. Because there it was again, the silence before. The satchel man adjusted his strap. His hand lingered near the clasp too long. Elise's stomach tightened. No one else noticed. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve, laughing. Two young men argued about the perfect angle for a photo. And Elise stood still, heart pounding, watching a story unfold that no one else could read. Not here, she thought. Not in this place of ceremony and cameras. But threats didn't wait for the right place. She had learned that the hard way. Years ago, on her second deployment, Elise had walked through a crowded bazaar. The air had been thick with spices and smoke, voices layered in languages she barely understood. She had scanned faces, hands, eyes. And she had missed it. A boy no older than 12 had stumbled into the street. At first, she thought he was running from someone. Then she saw the wires. Her chest burned now at the memory. The explosion had taken more than lives. It had taken her certainty. So when she saw the satchel man, every nerve screamed. She whispered to herself, almost inaudible, "Not again." The guard nearest to her shifted, barely perceptible. His eyes, hidden beneath the shadow of his bearskin, flicked once toward her. A flicker of recognition. Or was she imagining it? Her breath caught. Yesterday, a guard had looked at her deliberately. Today, another shifted. Coincidence, or something woven through ritual, waiting for her alone to notice. The satchel man turned. His eyes swept the crowd, sharp, calculating. They landed on her just for an instant. Elise's body tensed. She felt that same rush from the desert ridge, the anticipation before a trigger pull. But here in the heart of London there was no rifle, no cover, no orders. Only instinct. She followed. Not close enough to alarm him, but close enough to watch. The crowd thinned as he drifted down a side street, away from the palace. His stride was purposeful, too measured for a tourist. Elise matched his pace, her breath steady but shallow. Every step felt like betrayal. Betrayal of her promise to stay away from shadows, to live as someone ordinary. But her legs carried her anyway. The street grew quieter. Shops lined the road, windows filled with trinkets and postcards. A busker strummed a guitar near the corner, singing a ballad of love lost. The song's sorrow threaded through Elise like an old wound reopened. The satchel man paused at a cafe window, his reflection merging with hers in the glass. He adjusted the strap again, but this time his hand slipped inside. Her chest tightened. She braced herself for movement, for chaos. But he pulled out a book. Her jaw clenched. Relief washed through her, but it was jagged, sharp with suspicion. Who carries a satchel that heavy for just a book? The man slipped inside the cafe. Elise hesitated. Then she pushed through the door. The smell of roasted coffee and sugar clung to the air. People chatted in hushed tones, laptops open, spoons clinking against cups. The man sat near the back, placing the satchel beside him. He opened the book, didn't read, just waited. Elise ordered tea she wouldn't drink and slid into a seat with a clear view. Her training screamed at her, too close, too obvious. But she wasn't on a mission. She wasn't supposed to be doing this at all. So why did it feel like one? The man's eyes flicked up, scanning. Brief, controlled, too controlled. She forced her shoulders to relax, her face blank, her breathing even. But inside, her mind raced. She thought of James again. His laugh, his promises, his absence. And she wondered, what am I doing here? Minutes passed, nothing happened, people came and went. The man drank coffee, pages of the book untouched. Then another man entered. Dark coat, hair cropped short, eyes that didn't belong to a casual customer. He walked straight to the satchel man. They didn't shake hands, didn't smile, just exchanged a look Elise knew too well, the look of people who carried more than they admitted. Her pulse hammered. She couldn't hear their words over the cafe noise, but she didn't need to. The body language told her everything. This wasn't random. This was a meeting. The satchel man leaned closer to his companion. His fingers tapped twice on the table, deliberate, rhythmic. Elise's stomach dropped. She recognized it, a signal. Her throat tightened. The past wasn't past at all. It was here in this cafe, unfolding in front of her. And once again, she was the only one who saw it. She left before they noticed her. Stepping back into the street, the cold wind struck her face, sharp and sobering. Her legs trembled. She should have reported it, should have walked into the nearest station and told them everything. But her voice felt trapped. Who would believe her? A retired soldier, alone, haunted, seeing patterns in shadows. But it wasn't just shadows. It was real. And the guard yesterday, he had known. He had looked at her because he understood. Because the silence was breaking. That night she lay awake, city lights flickering across her ceiling. Her mind replayed every detail: the satchel, the book, the signal, the guard's eyes. She remembered the words her father used to say before she ever wore a uniform. Sometimes, Elise, the world asks you twice before it breaks you once. Was this the second asking? Her chest ached. She didn't know what was coming. But she knew this. She was already inside it. And there was no way out. Why did they vanish so quickly? Elise replayed the cafe moment over and over in her mind, trying to capture every detail. The tapping fingers, the unspoken recognition between two men, the satchel resting like an anchor on the table. But what haunted her most wasn't what she saw, it was what she didn't. By the time she had circled back later that evening, the cafe was empty. The chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed, and there was no trace of them. No satchel, no book, no men, as if they had never been there. Her boots echoed against the slick pavement as she walked away. London's rain had returned, harder now, soaking through her coat, dripping from her lashes. She should have let it go. She should have told herself it was nothing more than paranoia, a soldier's brain reading war into shadows. But she couldn't. Because once again, she remembered the guard. That piercing glance, sharp, intentional. Not a look at a stranger, but at someone he expected. Someone who knew how to read signals. And Elise hated the truth curling through her. He was right. She had read it. And now she couldn't unread it. By morning, her decision was made. She couldn't sit idle, not while the silence pressed closer. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Her first step wasn't the police. It wasn't the military liaison office either. It was a library. Because sometimes information didn't come from reports or briefings. Sometimes it came from history, rituals, traditions, codes buried in plain sight. She traced her fingers over dusty shelves until she found what she was searching for. Books on the Queen's Guard, their origins, their rules of conduct, their unbreakable vow of silence and stillness. But one passage stopped her cold. There are exceptions to silence. A guard may break formation only if life is at risk, or if a covert signal must be delivered to one trained to recognize it. Her pulse quickened. Covert signal. The word vibrated through her, as sharp as the crack of a rifle shot. The guard hadn't broken formation for the tourist at all. He had done it for her. That night Elise sat by her window, the city humming below, the book open on her lap. Her tea had gone cold again, untouched. She thought of James, his voice teasing her about how she never finished a drink, how she always left cups abandoned half full. "Always in a hurry, Marlowe," he had laughed once. "One day you'll slow down and taste it." But James had never lived to see that day. Her chest tightened. She set the book aside and pressed her palm against the scar on her forearm. She needed to know what the guard wanted from her. Why her? Why now? But the silence offered no answer. 2 days later, she returned to the square. The crowd was the same, cameras flashing, children squealing, the march of boots against stone. But Elise wasn't watching the tourists this time. She was watching the soldiers. Every flicker of an eye, every angle of a boot, every minuscule betrayal of stillness. And then there, third from the left, a slight tilt of the head, not random, not natural. A signal. Her breath caught. She stayed rooted, not daring to move. The soldier's eyes didn't look at the crowd. They looked straight through them, straight at her. He blinked once, slow, deliberate. And in that blink, Elise understood the truth she had feared. This wasn't coincidence. This was recruitment. Her legs carried her away before the crowd dispersed. She didn't remember choosing to move, but she knew she had to. The further she got from the square, the heavier her breaths became, until she ducked into an alley and pressed her back against the cold brick. Recruitment. The word burned. She had walked away from that life. She had chosen silence, chosen to be ordinary. But they hadn't forgotten her. She thought of her last mission again, the one that ended with James's death. The one where her bullet had saved a convoy but cost her the man she couldn't save. That day had rewritten her, broken her. She had left because she thought the world no longer needed her. But what if it did? That evening she walked the city without direction, her thoughts circling like vultures. Neon lights blurred past her, buses roared, laughter spilled from pubs. Life thrived around her, oblivious. And then, again, she saw him. The satchel man. Across the street, half hidden in a crowd, his stride purposeful as ever. Her body reacted before her mind caught up. She followed. Through crowded intersections, past the glow of storefronts, deeper into streets where the laughter dimmed. The satchel swung against his side heavy. He stopped at a door plain unmarked, knocked twice. It opened. He slipped inside. Elise froze. Her chest ached with the weight of choice. She could walk away, forget him, forget the guard, forget the silence. Or she could follow. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle. And in that trembling she heard James's voice again, steady, calm, the way he'd sounded on the ridge before everything shattered. Sometimes, Elise, you don't choose the moment. The moment chooses you. She pushed the door open. The room smelled of damp stone and cigarettes. Dim lights buzzed overhead. Figures sat around a table, shadows swallowing their faces. The satchel man placed his bag on the table. He unzipped it. Elise's throat went dry. Inside, papers, not explosives, not weapons, documents, maps, photographs. She squinted from the shadows. What she saw chilled her. Military bases, transport routes, faces of men in uniform. And one face she knew too well. Her own. Her knees almost buckled. She pressed against the wall, heart slamming. Why her, why now? One of the men at the table spoke, his voice low, thick with an accent Elise couldn't quite place. She's in London, they'll find her. The satchel man nodded. Elise's stomach twisted. They weren't recruiting her. They were hunting her. She backed out silently, breath shallow, heart pounding. Her boots hit the pavement and she ran. Not toward safety, not toward silence, but toward the only place that could give her answers. The guards. Because if they had broken their ritual for her, they knew. And if they knew, then the storm had only just begun. Why had they put her face in the file? That question burned in Elise's mind as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her flat. Her chest rose and fell with restless breaths, the city outside muffled by fog. She had trained for years to disappear, to live in silence, to blend in, to bury her past beneath layers of ordinary life. And yet there it was, her face, printed in black and white, sitting among documents that weren't supposed to exist. She wasn't just a bystander, she was a target. The thought gnawed at her. It wasn't fear that kept her awake, it was disbelief. Why now? Why after all this time? And then she remembered the guard's eyes, that slow, deliberate blink, the unspoken signal. They had tried to warn her. Morning light crept through the blinds when Elise finally moved. She hadn't slept. Her hands trembled as she pulled on her jacket, as if her body remembered the weight of a rifle that wasn't there. She hated that feeling, the way muscle memory could betray her, dragging her back into a life she had sworn to leave behind. But she couldn't deny it anymore. She had been pulled back in. Her boots echoed on the cobblestones as she returned to the palace square. Crowds were already gathering, cameras raised, voices layered in accents from all over the world. To them, the guards were tradition, ceremony, spectacle. To Elise, they were the only link she had left. She stood near the edge of the rail, her eyes scanning the line of red tunics and bearskin hats, waiting, watching. For long minutes nothing happened. Stillness, silence, the ceremony of discipline performed without a flaw. And then again. One guard's jaw tightened, his boots shifted, barely a whisper of movement, but Elise caught it. Her heart stilled. Then his eyes found hers. He blinked once, slow, intentional. Elise's throat went dry. She knew what it meant. She didn't want to, but she did. Follow. The guard moved with the rest, mechanical, precise. But Elise tracked him, her gaze locked, her chest aching with the weight of a choice. The ceremony ended, the crowd dispersed, tourists spilled into streets, laughter filling the air. And Elise followed. The guard peeled off from the group, his stride purposeful but not hurried, his path weaving through narrow alleys away from the palace. Elise stayed back, her breath shallow, her pulse loud in her ears. Finally, he stopped at an iron gate tucked between stone walls. Without turning, without speaking, he slipped inside. Elise hesitated. Her body screamed to leave, to walk away, to forget. But the memory of her face in that satchel burned hotter than fear. She stepped forward, pushed the gate open, and walked into silence. The passage was dim, the air damp and cool. The sound of her boots echoed softly against stone. She followed the narrow corridor until it opened into a low-lit chamber. The guard stood there, still silent, his rifle slung against his shoulder. His face, shadowed by the bearskin hat, was unreadable. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, in a voice low and steady, he said, "You shouldn't be here." Elise swallowed. "You signaled me." His jaw tightened, "And you understood." Silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. Finally, Elise forced the words out. "Why is my face in their file?" The guard didn't move. His voice, when it came, was colder than the stone around them. "Because they haven't forgotten you." Her stomach twisted. She wanted to ask who they were, but deep down she already knew. Ghosts didn't vanish. They lingered. The missions you thought were over, the enemies you thought defeated, they had long memories. And she had been foolish to think she could outrun hers. The guard's eyes softened, just barely. "We saw them watching you, following you. That's why I broke rank." Elise's throat tightened. The memory of James flickered again, his crooked grin, the promise of coffee that never came. She felt the ache of loss in her chest like a blade twisting. "They killed him," she whispered, "and now they want me." The guard said nothing. Elise lifted her chin, steadying her voice. "Then tell me what I'm walking into." For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. "They're planning something, something here. We don't have all the pieces, but you," his eyes locked onto hers. "They think you're the key." Her breath caught. "Why me?" The guard's silence was louder than words. And in that silence, Elise realized the truth. It wasn't just about what she had done. It was about what she hadn't. When she stepped back onto the street, the city felt different, colder, every sound sharper, every shadow longer. She thought about what the guard had said, about being the key. Her mind spun back to the desert ridge, to the convoy, to James, to the mission that had shattered her. They had been after something that day, something bigger than she'd known. She had stopped part of it, but not all. And maybe that was why her face was in their file. Because unfinished battles had a way of finding you again. The days that followed blurred. Elise walked the city like a ghost, always scanning, always listening. The satchel men appeared in her periphery, sometimes near markets, sometimes on trains, always just far enough to remind her she wasn't imagining it. She tried to convince herself she was still in control, but the truth clawed at her. She was being hunted. And the only ones who knew it, the only ones signaling from the shadows, were bound by vows of silence. It was a cruel irony. She had run from the weight of silence her whole life, only to find herself relying on it again. One evening, as dusk bled into the city, Elise stopped at the river. The Thames rippled in the fading light, carrying secrets she couldn't name. She leaned against the railing, her chest heavy, her breaths uneven. She remembered her father's words again. The world asks you twice before it breaks you once. Was this the second asking? A gull cried overhead. Lights shimmered across the water. Somewhere behind her, footsteps slowed. She didn't turn. Her fingers clenched the railing, heart pounding. Because she already knew. Someone was watching. Why didn't he speak? The footsteps behind her had slowed, close enough now that Elise could feel the shift in the air, the subtle pressure of another presence. The city hummed around her, the river carrying its endless whisper, cars rushing across bridges, distant voices spilling out of pubs. Yet here, in this sliver of silence, everything narrowed to a single truth. She wasn't alone. Her hand brushed against the railing, fingers tense, body coiled. She had no weapon, no backup, no plan, just instinct. An instinct told her whoever stood behind her wasn't a curious passerby. Beautiful view, isn't it? The voice was calm, casual, but Elise heard the weight beneath it. An accent Eastern, clipped, deliberate, not local. She turned slowly, eyes locking on the man leaning a few feet away. He wore a dark coat, collar turned up, his face ordinary enough to vanish in a crowd. But his eyes weren't ordinary. They were too steady, too knowing. Elise's chest tightened. She had seen eyes like that before, on ridges, in marketplaces, in mirrors after missions. Predator's eyes. "You've been busy," the man said, his tone almost conversational. "Following people who aren't yours to follow." Elise didn't answer. She studied him the way she used to study a scope's crosshairs, every twitch, every breath, every line of tension. The man's lips curved, not quite a smile. "You should have stayed gone, Captain Marlowe." Her blood went cold. He knew her name. For a moment the river roared louder in her ears. The crowd across the embankment blurred. All that existed was the truth she had been trying not to face. They weren't just watching her. They knew exactly who she was. Her voice was low, steady, though her pulse hammered. "If you know me, then you know you should have kept walking." The man chuckled, the sound soft, almost kind. "Still sharp, still dangerous." His head tilted. "But you're not here for them, are you? You're here because you can't let go, you never could." James's face flashed in her mind. His crooked grin, his laugh, the promises they never kept. Her jaw tightened. "What do you want?" The man's smile faded. His eyes darkened. To finish what should have been finished years ago. And then he was gone. Just turned, melted into the crowd as if he'd never been there. Elise's breaths came fast. Her fists clenched so tight her nails dug into her palms. They weren't just hunting her, they were taunting her. And she hated how much of it worked. The night swallowed her walk back. Every shadow stretched too long, every sound sharper than it should have been. She reached her flat and locked the door, leaning against it as her chest heaved. She told herself to breathe, to think, to regain control. But her eyes fell on the empty chair across the table, the one she never used, the one that always made her think of James. She remembered his voice again, softer this time, tired after long shifts in the field. "You can't save everyone, Elise. You'll break yourself trying." Her throat tightened. She pressed her palms against her face, fighting the weight pressing in. Maybe she already had. Mourning didn't bring relief, it brought resolve. Elise wasn't naive enough to think she could stop what was coming alone, but she also wasn't naive enough to believe anyone else would see it in time. So she returned to the palace square. The guards stood as always, statues of discipline, their stillness defying the chaos of the city. Tourists laughed, cameras clicked, history was reduced to spectacle. But Elise wasn't watching the crowd. She was waiting. And then movement. A guard blinked, slow, deliberate, his head tilted almost imperceptibly toward a side street. Elise's pulse surged. She moved. The street was quieter, lined with narrow brick buildings and the scent of old stone. She followed the invisible trail until a figure stepped out from a recessed doorway. The same guard, without bearskin, without rifle, just a man now, his face sharper, older than she expected, lines etched from years of silence. He studied her in stillness before finally speaking. "You shouldn't have come." Her jaw tightened. "You keep saying that, but you keep calling me." The man's eyes flickered, a faint nod. "Because you're already in it, whether you want to be or not." Elise folded her arms, forcing her voice steady. "Then tell me why. Tell me why my face is in their file." For the first time, the guard's composure faltered. His gaze dropped, then lifted again, heavy with weight. "Because you stopped them once, and they never forgave you." Elise's chest tightened. She thought of the ridge again, the convoy, the boy with wires, the explosion that stole James. She had pulled the trigger that ended one life and saved others, but she had never known the full picture. Now the pieces began to form. The man's voice was low. "That day wasn't random. It was part of something bigger. You cut the thread, but the web is still there." Her breath caught, and now they're weaving again. Elise pressed her back against the wall, her mind spiraling. The satchel, the cafe, the maps, the faces. This wasn't just about her. This was about what she had interrupted years ago. And maybe, just maybe, they believed she was the only one who could interrupt it again. That night, Elise couldn't escape the images. James laughing under the stars. James shouting into the radio as the blast tore through the air. James's silence after. She remembered holding his dog tags in her hand, feeling the metal cut into her palm, swearing she was done. But the world hadn't been done with her. Her reflection in the window stared back, pale, tired, but alive. And for the first time in years, she whispered aloud, "What if I go back?" The words hung in the air, sharp as glass. Because she knew the answer already. Going back wouldn't just be about stopping them. It would be about redeeming herself. The following day, Elise stood at the river again, watching the city move as if nothing lurked beneath its surface. She clutched James's dog tags in her pocket, the metal warm from her grip. A question echoed in her mind, one she wasn't sure she wanted to answer. Was she chasing them because they threatened the city? Or because she couldn't forgive herself for the one she had lost? The wind rose, carrying the faint sound of bells. Elise lifted her chin, eyes narrowing. It didn't matter. Because either way, the silence was over. And she was ready to break it. What was she willing to risk this time? The question shadowed Elise as she crossed the Thames at dawn, the city stirring awake around her. Joggers moved past, headphones sealing them in their own worlds. Buses rumbled over bridges. London was alive, oblivious to what pressed at its seams. She walked with her hood drawn low, James's dog tags warm against her palm. Her boots tapped steady on the pavement, but her chest carried the uneven rhythm of a heart caught between dread and resolve. Last night she'd whispered the words, "What if I go back?" And now she knew there was no taking them back. She was already in motion. But motion toward what? Toward justice, or toward another scar she couldn't survive. She didn't wait for the guard this time. She sought him. The narrow street from yesterday was empty, its bricks damp with morning rain. She scanned doorways, alleys, the ripples of curtains that could hide a watcher. She thought she was alone until she heard the scrape of boots on stone. The man emerged, the same one who'd broken formation, now in plain clothes again. His posture was rigid, yet his eyes flickered with something Elise hadn't expected, fatigue. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low. She met his gaze without flinching. "Then why point me here?" For a long moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the rain dripping from gutters. Finally, he spoke, "Because I needed to see if you'd come." His name was Collins, that much he gave her. No rank, no unit, no past, just Collins. He walked with her, leading her down a side street, through a service entrance, and into a dim corridor that smelled of stone and polish. "What is this?" Elise asked. "You asked why you're in their file." Collins glanced back at her. "It's because of Kandahar, the convoy, the boy." Elise froze, her throat constricted at the words. "I saw the reports," Collins continued. "They wanted him to succeed. They wanted the blast to trigger the chain, but you cut it short. You saved dozens, maybe more, and you left them with nothing but ash and rage." Her stomach twisted. She had replayed that shot in her mind 1,000 times, never sure if she'd chosen right. And now this stranger told her it had mattered more than she'd known. But his eyes said it hadn't been enough. They entered a quiet chamber, a room stripped bare but for a table with folders stacked in neat rows. Collins spread them open, revealing photographs, blurry stills of men passing through airports, loading vans, entering storage units across Europe. Each image carried the same sigil somewhere in the frame, a mark almost hidden, a circle split by 3 jagged lines. "They call themselves Vayar," Collins said. "Old word, means return. They've been waiting, planning, and now they're close." Elise's eyes landed on one photo, 2 figures handling what looked like canisters. Her chest tightened. "Chemical." Collins nodded grimly. "Enough to choke a city, maybe more." The weight settled in her gut. If James were here, he'd be packing, already calculating angles, contingencies. He'd say, "We don't wait for them to come to us." She blinked hard, grounding herself. "So where do I fit in?" Collins hesitated. "They know your face, they know your history, you're the ghost they couldn't kill, and that makes you useful." The words hit like a strike. Useful, not safe, not protected, just expendable leverage. That night Elise lay awake in her flat, staring at the ceiling. The rain outside had quieted, leaving only the hum of the city. Collins's words gnawed at her. Useful. Was that all she had become? Her fingers curled around the dog tags, pressing them against her sternum. She remembered James telling her once, when she doubted herself after a mission had gone sideways, "You're more than what they use you for. Don't forget that." But she had. Somewhere along the way she had. Tears threatened, hot against her eyes, but she forced them back. She wasn't broken, not yet. If they wanted to use her, fine, but she'd decide how. The next day, Collins placed a small envelope in her hands. Inside was a train ticket. Brussels. "They're moving something," he explained. "Not the weapon itself, blueprints, contacts, financing. But if we intercept, we disrupt the chain." Elise studied him. "We." His jaw tightened. "I can't move openly, not anymore, but you know one expects you. They'll think you're still running from ghosts." She almost laughed at the irony. Running from ghosts was all she'd ever done. But the thought of Brussels pulled at her. Another country, another border, another chance to lose herself in shadows. She looked down at the ticket, then back at him. "If I do this, it's not for you, not for them, it's for me." Collins nodded once, as it should be. On the train, Elise watched the countryside blur past, green fields broken by towns that looked too small to hold danger. She sat alone, her reflection flickering in the glass. Her mind drifted to James, to the night before his last patrol when he had admitted in a rare whisper, "I'm tired, Elise, tired of waiting for the next explosion." She had brushed it off then, thinking he was venting, but now she wondered if he'd already known, if somewhere deep down he had felt the end coming. Her chest ached. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, letting the rumble of the train fill her ears. "I'm tired too," she whispered. Brussels was damp gray, its cobblestones slick with drizzle. Elise followed the trail Collins had marked, an address near the edge of the city, an industrial district that smelled of oil and rust. She slipped into shadows, moving like she had years ago in villages and valleys, every sense tuned sharp. She hated how natural it felt. The building was unremarkable: concrete walls, steel doors, a faded company name long abandoned. But through the cracked window she saw them. 3 men huddled over a table, papers spread between them. Her pulse quickened. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the sigil scrawled on the corner of the map. Vayar. Her fingers tightened around James's tags. She should have turned back, should have waited for Collins, should have called someone. Instead, she pushed the door open. The hinges groaned, the men froze. Elise stepped inside, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. "Looks like you're meeting. Over." One of them sneered, switching languages she didn't recognize, but the threat in his tone was universal. Another reached under the table. Her body moved before her mind caught up, grabbing the edge of the table, flipping it hard. Papers scattered, a glass bottle shattered, shouts filled the air. For a moment, chaos reigned. And in that chaos, Elise felt something she hadn't in years. Alive. By the time she staggered back into the street, bruised and breathless, she clutched more than she had dared hope. One of the folders pulled free in the struggle. Her chest heaved, lungs burning, but her eyes locked on the mark stamped across the documents. A list: names, codes, dates. Proof. She leaned against the wall, trembling, rain mixing with sweat on her skin. For the first time the weight shifted. She wasn't just running anymore, she was chasing. And she knew this was only the beginning. What if the folder wasn't enough? The thought dug into Elise as she sat in a dim corner of a Brussels cafe, the stolen papers spread in fragments across the table. The rain outside tapped steady against the glass, blurring the streets into watercolor. Her coffee had gone cold. Her hands shook when she tried to hold it. The folder was heavy with names, codes, and transit routes. But it wasn't a weapon. Not yet. It was a thread, one of many. Pulling it could unravel the web or snap in her hands and leave her strangled. She traced one name with her finger, lips pressing into a thin line. The letters blurred for a moment and she realized her vision was wet. She wiped quickly, angry at herself. She hadn't wept when she buried James. Why now, in a foreign city, surrounded by strangers? Because for the first time since his death, she felt close to the thing that had taken him. And the closer she got, the more fragile she felt. Collins arrived without announcement. One moment the chair across from her was empty. The next, it scraped quietly as he sat. "You got it," he said, eyes on the folder. Elise didn't look up, barely, and they'll know it's missing. "They already know," he replied. "They'll come harder now." She lifted her gaze, sharp. "You didn't warn me about 3 of them." "I warned you it wouldn't be clean." His tone was calm, but she caught the tension in his jaw. "And yet here you are, alive, with the papers." Alive, the word landed strange. Survival didn't feel like life, it felt like delay. She pushed the folder toward him. "Tell me what I'm looking at." Collins scanned the pages with the focus of a man who had been doing this far too long. He pointed to a line of codes. "These are shipments, containers moving under false registries, each linked to a hub: Rotterdam, Hamburg, Marseille." Elise leaned closer. "And this name?" His face tightened. "A broker, old ghost, we thought he was gone." "Not gone enough," Elise muttered. The cafe door opened. Elise's instincts prickled. A man entered, coat dripping from the rain, his eyes scanning the room too carefully before settling on an empty table. She stiffened. Collins noticed. He closed the folder slowly. "We can't stay." They rose, moving as if unhurried, slipping into the drizzle. Elise's breath came quick in the cold air, every nerve alive. "Was that them?" she asked. Collins didn't answer, which was answer enough. They didn't speak until they were deep in the back streets, the rain muffling their steps. Elise pulled her hood low, but her thoughts screamed loud. "How many know I'm involved?" she pressed. "Enough," Collins said flatly, "but not all yet." Yet the word chilled her more than the rain. She stopped, forcing him to face her. "I need the truth, all of it, or I walk." For the first time, Collins's expression cracked. His eyes softened, almost pained. "You think you were the only one who lost someone on that ridge. You think James was the only name carried home in silence." Elise's breath caught. Collins's voice dropped. "My brother was in that convoy. You pulled the trigger that saved him. He wrote me once, said a woman on Overwatch had given them a chance. That was you. That's why I knew your face. That's why I trust you now." The world tilted. Elise felt the ground unsteady beneath her. She had saved someone's brother, and yet she hadn't saved James. Her throat tightened, words clawing upward but choking before they escaped. She turned away, blinking hard against the rain. Collins didn't press. He just said softly, "We can't afford to stop now." That night in a safe flat, Elise couldn't sleep. The folder lay open on the table, codes staring back like silent accusations. She sat with James's dog tags clutched in her fist, the metal biting her skin. She thought of Collins's brother, of the convoy, of the boy with wires around his chest. She remembered the sight in her scope, the impossible decision, the squeeze of her finger. And she thought of James, his laugh, his hand brushing hers under desert stars. Tears spilled freely this time. She let them. She whispered to the empty room, voice shaking, "I saved someone else's brother. Why couldn't I save mine?" The silence that answered was unbearable. At dawn, she packed the folder into her rucksack and walked with Collins to the station. The trains rumbled like veins carrying the lifeblood of Europe, endless and unstoppable. He pointed to a line in the notes. "Hamburg, that's the next hub." Elise nodded, though her stomach knotted. "And then?" "We follow the chain until it breaks." She swallowed. "And if it breaks us first?" Collins's gaze lingered on her. "Then at least we didn't look away." The words settled deep. They weren't heroic. They were resigned. And somehow that made them truer than anything she'd heard in years. Hamburg was colder, wind biting off the water. The port sprawled like a steel maze, cranes creaking, containers stacked like endless tombs. Elise moved with Collins through the industrial sprawl, each step echoing the weight of what they hunted. At one junction she paused, her breath visible in the air. She stared at rows of containers, the sheer scale overwhelming. "What if we're too late?" she asked quietly. Collins adjusted the strap of his pack. "Then we're not done, not until they're stopped. That's what this is, Elise. It doesn't end clean." She turned to him, searching his face. "Does it ever end at all?" He didn't answer. The silence said enough. They found the container marked with the sigil hidden among hundreds. Collins's lockpick scraped softly in the cold air. Elise's pulse thudded in her ears. The door groaned open. Inside, stacked in crates, were cylinders sealed in black casings. Not yet armed, not yet deployed, but ready. Elise stepped closer, her chest heaving. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cold steel. For a moment, James's face flashed before her eyes. She whispered under her breath, trembling, "We're not too late, not this time." But even as relief brushed her, shadows moved outside the container. Voices, footsteps. They weren't alone. Why did silence always come before violence? Elise held her breath inside the container, the cold steel of the cylinder still beneath her fingertips. Outside, the footsteps paused, muffled voices bouncing off the walls of the stacked cargo. She exchanged a sharp glance with Collins. His hand moved to his coat, brushing the outline of a concealed pistol. Her own hands felt naked, empty. The silence thickened, then metal screeched. The container door jolted, light slicing in. They'd been found. 3 men entered first, their faces shadowed by hoods, their movements precise. Not thugs trained. Their eyes landed on the crates, then on her. One of them muttered something in a language she didn't know, but his tone carried recognition. Her. Elise's pulse surged. She felt the weight of James's dog tags in her pocket, grounding her. Collins raised his weapon steady but didn't fire. "Back away," he warned. The men didn't. Another voice called from outside, colder, commanding. And then a figure stepped into view, a man Elise recognized instantly, though she'd only seen him once years ago through a rifle scope. The architect, the one who had sent the boy onto the ridge, the face etched into her nightmares. Her body stiffened, breath catching in her throat. He was older now, hair streaked with gray, but his eyes, those predator's eyes, hadn't changed. He looked at her with cruel amusement. "So, the ghost returns." Her skin prickled. The world seemed to tilt. She had imagined this moment countless times, facing the man who had orchestrated James's death. She had thought she would scream or fire or crumble. Instead, she stood frozen. Collins's voice cut through, taut with restraint. "We don't have to end it here." The architect smiled thinly. "No, Captain Marlowe wants it here, don't you?" Elise's throat tightened. She wanted to say yes, to demand blood, justice, anything, but the truth tangled inside her. What she wanted wasn't revenge, it was James, and James was gone. Her silence was answer enough. The man's smile widened. "Good, because we planned for you." The clash was sudden. Collins fired, the crack ricocheting through the container. The men lunged, the world collapsing into fists, shouts, the crash of steel. Elise grabbed what she could, a metal rod from the corner, and swung hard, her body remembering motions it had buried. The fight was chaos. One man went down, another slammed into her shoulder, pain ripping down her arm. She gritted her teeth, drove the rod into his ribs, felt him stagger. Collins grappled with the third, both crashing against crates that threatened to topple. The architect stood back, calm, watching with that same cruel smile. Elise's chest heaved, rage burning hotter with every blow. She wanted to reach him, to end him, but the men wouldn't fall fast enough. And then a shot. Collins gasped, stumbling, blood blooming dark across his coat. "No," Elise's cry tore from her throat. She swung again, desperate, eyes blurring. She slammed the rod into the gunman's face, sending him collapsing to the floor. Collins staggered, clutching his side, his face pale but still alive. The architect's voice slithered through the chaos. "You see, you can't protect anyone, not then, not now." The words struck harder than any fist. Elise froze, breath ragged, James's dog tags burning against her palm. She remembered James's last laugh, his last shout, the silence after. And suddenly she knew. She couldn't save everyone, but she could stop this. Her eyes lifted, fierce, meeting the architect's. "You're right," she said, voice steady. "I can't protect everyone." She raised the pistol she had ripped from the fallen man's hand. "But I can stop you." For the first time, the man's smile faltered. The shot rang out. The echo lingered long after the body crumpled. Elise stood trembling, the pistol still raised, her arm heavy as if carrying years of weight. Her breath came in jagged bursts, her body buzzing with adrenaline and grief colliding. Collins slumped against a crate, pressing his wound. "You did it," he rasped. Elise lowered the weapon slowly, staring at the fallen man. Did she do it, or had she only fed the cycle? She knelt beside Collins, her hands pressing firm against his wound. "Stay with me." His eyes met hers, pain etched deep. "You gave us a chance again." Her throat ached. She remembered his words in Brussels. "At least we didn't look away." She wasn't looking away now, not anymore. The authorities came hours later, tipped by Collins's silent call before they moved on the port. Elise and Collins slipped away before questions could pin them down, the folder left where it could be found. By the time the sun rose, Elise stood alone on a quiet bridge, the city waking beneath her. She held James's dog tags in her hand, the metal warm from her grip. She thought of his laugh, his tired words, his absence. She thought of Collins, of his brother, of the countless names in that folder who would never know how close they had come. And for the first time, she felt the smallest thread of peace. Not because she had won, not because she had ended anything, but because she had finally faced what she had been running from. A tourist wandered nearby, pointing his camera toward the skyline. He glanced at her, curious, maybe wondering what story lay behind the woman standing alone, tears on her face, dog tags in her hand. He would never know. And she wouldn't tell him. Because some things weren't for words. They were for silence. She closed her hand around the tags, lifted her chin, and walked away. The city moved on as it always did, but Elise knew, deep in her bones, that something had shifted. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And then it disappears back into the crowd.